So, question number 1. How did the political environment during the enactment of each Philippine Constitution, the 1899, 1935, 1973, and 1987, shape the specific rights and freedoms included in these documents? So each Philippine constitution reflects the unique political environments of its time, shaping the specific rights and freedoms of each constitution. The Philippine Constitution in 1899, or the Malolos Constitution, was enacted during the time of revolution against the oppressive Spanish colonial rule. Thus, this constitution emphasizes the civil liberties inspired by democratic ideals such as freedom of the press, religion and speech, and the right to assembly. It also features equality before the law. These rights highlighted the Filipinos' desire for governance. It symbolizes the rejection of colonial oppression and the desire of independence. In 1935 Constitution, it was created when the Philippines is under the American colonial rule. In these times, the Philippines was transitioning from American rule to full independence. So due to the America's democratic and liberal ideals, these constitutions were heavily influenced by the U.S. Constitution. These documents matches the fundamental civil rights and liberties including due process, freedom of speech, and the protection of property rights. The emphasis on the democratic principles such as the separation of powers and individual freedoms was part of the larger vision of preparing the Philippines for self-rule. This constitution reflected the Filipinos' aspiration for sovereignty but was also shaped by American democratic ideas, balancing independence with the reality of colonial influence. In 1973, it was a period marked by Ferdinand Marcos' authoritarian regime, the declaration of martial law and political unrest. 1973 Constitution was enacted to consolidate Marcos' power and extended his rule. The 1973 Constitution granted powers to the executive branch, which diminished certain freedoms and allowing for rule by decree. Freedom of speech, assembly, and due process were heavily compromised. This constitution reflected the political environment of control and repression, allowing the government to suppress dissent in the name of stability and security. After the Marcos regime, the 1987 Constitution was enacted. It was established after the People Power Revolution, which ended the Marcos dictatorship. It was created during a time of democratic resurgence with a strong public demand for accountability, human rights, and restoration of democratic processes. The 1987 Constitution placed a significant emphasis on civil liberties, human rights, and social justice, including explicit protection against abuses like arbitrary detention and torture. It expanded protections for freedom of speech, assembly, and due process while also emphasizing social rights such as education, labor, and women rights. The inclusion of a Bill of Rights and provisions for government accountability demonstrate a response to the abuses of martial law and aspiration to prevent future authoritarianism. The political environment of each period profoundly shaped the rights and freedoms in each constitution. These documents collectively illustrate how historical challenges and aspiration influenced the development of Filipino rights and freedoms, building toward a more democratic society.
Question number 2. Why was the adoption of the 1987 Constitution necessary considering the issues with the 1973 Constitution? So the adoption of the 1987 Constitution was essential due to the shortcomings of the 1973 Constitution, which facilitated Ferdinand Marcos' authoritarian regime. So, under the 1973 Constitution, Marcos declared martial law, allowing him to rule by decree and suppress democratic institutions. So, this constitution was ratified through questionable means, including citizens' assemblies instead of a proper plebiscite, undermining its legitimacy. The 1973 document concentrated power in the presidency, enabling Marcos to amend it unilaterally and effectively become a one-man ruler. So legislative oversight was nearly non-existent, and the judiciary was manipulated to serve his interest. So widespread human rights abuses occurred during this period, prompting calls for reform. So the 1987 Constitution, drafted after the People Power Revolution that ousted Marcos, which aimed to prevent the abuses of power that occurred under the previous constitution. So the 1987 Constitution aimed to restore democracy by establishing a system of checks and balances among the executive, legislative, and the judicial branches. The 1987 Constitution reintroduced a presidential system and included a comprehensive Bill of Rights to protect civil liberties. So in essence, the 1987 Constitution was a response to the excesses and abuses that occurred under the 1973 Constitution. So it sought to restore democratic institutions, protect civil liberties, and prevent the concentration of power that had allowed for authoritarian rule. So the new constitution was seen as a crucial step in the Philippines' transition back to democracy after years of dictatorship.
Question number 3. How do the revolutionary ideals expressed in the 1899 Malulus Constitution compare to the democratic principles found in the 1987 Constitution? The 1899 Malolos Constitution and the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines represent two distinct visions of governance and democracy shaped by their historical contexts. The Malolos Constitution, created during the Philippine Revolution, emphasized independence from colonial rule and laid the foundation for a parliamentary system. It envisioned the president as head of state but accountable to a legislative assembly, showcasing a commitment to collective governance. Its design reflected the revolutionary goals of self-determination and a limited yet effective government, inspired by European liberalism. It also included a broad, though concise, Bill of Rights but lacked detailed provisions for economic policies and other governmental functions. This constitution aimed to unify the Philippines as a sovereign state, though its implementation was cut short by American colonization. Meanwhile, the 1987 Constitution was established after the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos and prioritized democratic safeguards. It sets up a presidential system with checks and balances across three independent branches of government: the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. It included a more comprehensive Bill of Rights, protection against martial law abuses, and independent commissions to oversee elections, public service, and audit functions. Unlike the Malolos Constitution, the 1987 framework provides specific guidelines for economic policies, reflecting a more complex modern state structure, sharing commitment to democratic ideals but expressing them through different government structures and emphasis on civil liberties adapted to their unique historical needs. In summary, while both constitutions advocate for democracy and the rule of law, the Malulus Constitution prioritizes independence and governance during a revolutionary period, whereas the 1987 Constitution deeply embeds protections for human rights shaped by a reaction to authoritarianism and aim at a stable democratic society. Thus, I can attest that the 1987 Constitution reflects a more mature understanding of democracy, incorporating lessons from past experiences and global democratic trends.